Well, good day and welcome to you. It is December the 1st. I hope you are having a fantastic day wherever you happen to be. My name is Gary Willing. I want to welcome everybody to Search for Signs, whether you've heard this information before or you're coming on to this information and upon this information for the very first time. I'm just really glad you're here. Now, for those of us who are totally new, I do want to say this real quick. If you check out the links that I provided in the description portion of every one of my videos, you can get a lot of background information. You can get to start to educate yourself better about this information if you like. But I do think the most important thing that any one of us can do in reference to this information is see if there's any truth to it for ourselves. Don't take my word for it. And hopefully you just don't, shut it down outright, because this information sounds crazy. I'll admit that. I'll be the first to admit this information sounds off the wall crazy, utopian, and really far-fetched based on what we see with our own eyes in terms of what's going on in the world and so forth. But if you do your own research, you might see that there might be some truth to this, or even better yet, you might see something that you can do to help the world if you aren't already doing something. So hopefully you'll take advantage of it and you'll do it. But if you go to the Share International website, there you can get it from the horse's mouth probably better than you can from any of the other links that I provided. But the other links are good, but not as good as the Share International site. So hopefully if you're totally new, you check out that link per se and start doing your own research on this. And then if you want to come back and comment or ask questions or whatever, I invite anybody to do that. Now, speaking of comments, I had originally planned on doing a video talking about kind of highlighting some of the things that I read aloud in the last video, the article that Benjamin Creme's master wrote entitled "The Coming Transformation," and kind of talk about some things. And then a comment came my way by a gentleman named Herbert Howard Jones, and I really want to talk about this first, if that's okay. So, Herbert, if you're listening, I really appreciate you taking the time to comment. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of read the whole comment all the way through so you can get a flow of it, and then I'm gonna try to take it bit by bit and kind of talk about it, if that's okay. And Herbert, if you're listening, I don't want this to come across that I'm trying to be defensive or anything like that, because I really am not. I understand where you're coming from. I truly do. And I want to say that I want to thank you for taking the time to write this out. So hopefully this will help clarify some things or help or whatever. All right, so what he wrote was, there is a mullah who is the leader of a mosque in Brick Lane, London, who made quite a few videos, posted online, and has his own sort of TV network. He is known locally as The Boss, which coincides with Creme's claim that Maitreya was based in Brick Lane. However, when Creme promised some assembled media back in the 80s that Maitreya would personally appear, Creme gave some rather far-fetched cosmic excuses as to why he didn't. I personally met Creme and knew a very close follower of his who incidentally had bought a number of Creme's abstract paintings. I began to strongly doubt that Creme was saying and realized that a number of his followers were also sponsoring his art, which I thought was rather mediocre. I came to suspect that Creme was financially benefiting from his claims of being Maitreya's spokesman. I am sorry to say that I think Creme was the main beneficiary of what I now believe was either an unintentional scam by an innocently deluded man or a deliberate one for financial gain, especially since nothing Creme claimed seemed to have panned out. No TV interviews found, no day of declaration announcement, a tall tale of Maitreya appearing to Putin, and his appearance to all the British press in private and making himself invisible. Come on now. Then there are the stories of ordinary people apparently meeting the Maitreya in the street and asking Creme for confirmation, and Creme saying, quote, "Yes, that was Maitreya you met," unquote. He seems to be saying yes to every query of that kind, and having them published in his magazine. The original newspaper announcement of the arrival of the Christ in the world cost around £30,000, I think, and was money raised by his followers and supporters, and that was decades ago. So I suspect we're going to be waiting in vain for any of Creme's predictions to come true. So, that all being said, Herbert, I definitely understand where you're coming from. In fact, I've said a number of times on this channel, I understand that concern about this information, about it not being true at all, than those who make claims that he's the Antichrist and never have even seen him, heard him, even probably taken the time to even read anything about his priorities. And so I'm not trying to convince you that you're wrong, so don't take it like that, please. We're just having a conversation, but like I said, I really do thank you for taking the time to post this. I heard it was about 30,000 pounds too, so I think you are right about the cost of the newspaper ad. So I'll start with that, okay? And it was decades ago. It was in 1982 that he made the announcement that there was a possibility that the Christ could come out. But here's where you said, let me go back to the first part. So that was the last part of what you posted, but I wanted to comment on that first because it's probably the least important. There is a mullah who is the leader of a mosque in Brick Lane, London, who made quite a few videos posted online and has his own sort of television network. He is known locally as The Boss, which coincides with Creme's claim that Maitreya was based in Brick Lane, London. All right, so that first part, I don't know who you're talking about, so I can't honestly tell you yes or no, and I wouldn't, if I listened to it and I saw it, I really probably shouldn't tell you yes or no, really. But I will say more than likely it's not. Now, the reason why I'm thinking it's not is because if you know Krishna, and I'm kind of segueing in a way that it might not sound like, why is he saying this? But if you know who Krishnamurti was, okay, and you're familiar with his teachings and a little bit of his background coming from the Theosophical Society, I would assume because he was a very close disciple of Maitreya. In fact, Maitreya said he was a true disciple of his teachings, actually. He was asked by the Theosophical Society to head up the Theosophical Society. He probably would have done a great job at it. But he turned it down, and he would rather just, kind of teach and not have any kind of authoritarian kind of role in anything. I would assume that Maitreya probably is this. I know, in fact, I kind of have under good authority, for lack of a better phrase, that is his approach and his standing in the community in Brick Lane, that he wasn't any kind of authority on anything. Now, it has been said that he spent time in each one of the mosques in Brick Lane. He would spend some time in this one, and, for a time, and then he would go to the next one, and he would kind of circle around, and he kept doing that for years. And there were people that were starting to suspect that he might have been the Imam Mahdi, but were afraid to speak out. There was actually an article that Benjamin Creme's master wrote talking about the people in Brick Lane that knew of Maitreya, maybe didn't see him as Maitreya, but started to think he was the Imam Mahdi and were afraid to speak out because they were afraid of even being deported because they were there illegally. That's just addressing that concern. Now, in terms of the assembled media and the excuses that Benjamin Creme gave that he didn't show up, is Benjamin Creme made the announcement to the media to encourage them to go into Brick Lane to seek him out, and nobody did. Now, the reason why it was important that they did this is because the media, as flawed as it is, and as corrupt as it is, and it's only gotten worse since the 80s, they are our representatives. From the eyes of the masters, they represent humanity. That's how we communicate with one another. So if they would have gone into the Brick Lane and to just seek him out, they wouldn't have found him, but just to seek him out, that Maitreya would have signaled to Maitreya that humanity was actually ready for him to start to speak on TV. And then he could have made an announcement, and then he could have approached him in that way. That was plan A, which obviously didn't work out. And because not one media representative, although there was this tremendous interest when he had the press conference in this information, not one a journalist of any note went into Brick Lane looking for him. And so that's what kind of put it back. So I don't really think it was any kind of excuses other than he had said that actually in the press conference, that it was contingent on the media going into Brick Lane trying to find him. Now, in terms of the other things not panning out, is that the next part that I want to... Okay, yeah, Creme gave some really far-fetched... Okay, and then he said, I personally met Creme and knew a very close follower of his who incidentally had bought a number of Creme's abstract paintings. I began to strongly doubt that Creme was saying and realized that a number of his followers were also sponsoring his art, which I thought was rather mediocre. Now, I find his artwork to be maybe not everybody's cup of tea, but it's quite fascinating, and from my perspective, being an artist myself. But I can see why somebody would say that. You know, I knew Benjamin Creme too, and I had met him many times, and I was a part of a group that organized several lectures with him, and he didn't get paid anything for his work with Share International and putting this information on. I can attest to that. He did work tirelessly for decades. I can attest to that. The times that I was in a conference with him, he started very early in the morning and ended very, very late, actually really early in the morning the next time. So he never stopped. And he did it for free. Now, he was a different type of person. And he and I didn't always see eye to eye on everything either. And one of the things that, I hate to say it, I disagreed with him on, I'm not saying he was wrong, I would have done it differently, I guess, is he didn't seem very patient with people who had concerns like you. Okay, that came to him and said, well, I never saw any, video, maybe there's no, he kind of seemed very impatient with this, which looking back on it, seeing the videos, his interviews, the times that I was around him, for some of the lectures and people were addressing those concerns, he kind of snapped at him a little bit. I would have approached it differently, but that was one thing that I not, like I said, disagree. I would just have done differently with him, but I can attest to you, he didn't get paid for it. Now, he's an artist. He was an artist. He was a professional artist. And, you have to make money in this world to live. You know what I'm saying? Unfortunately. But, so he had to make some kind of living some kind of way. But he wasn't in customer service. He didn't work as a patent clerk or anything like that, like Einstein did or whatever. He had that was his way of making money, and it was a service. I mean, painting is a service in its own way, Now, his paintings were also done and helped by and assisted by his master. So he said to a group of us when we were in confidence, he said that the reason why he sells his paintings to these groups is because it is actually a part of this information. It's a part of the reappearance of the Christ and the Masters of Wisdom, where he wasn't just painting it and then shilling it on the side. And he never really, he wasn't proactive in selling it to the group. There were people who did it for him, but he never really, hey, you should buy this and you should buy this one. And he never did that. Because every year at the conferences that I went to, there was always a new lithograph that he had, that he sold, and he made proceeds off of it. But it was, he said, and you might not believe this based on your comment, that his master could, if you stood in front of the lithograph, which I own a few of them myself, his master could actually see you in that, through that painting and send you a blessing or a healing or something. So that's why he was, that's why it was encouraged for people to get it. But the times that it's interesting. I actually was talking to him myself one time about the number of lithographs that I had purchased. I had purchased 2 at the time, and I was really excited that I had 2. And he said, "You really only need 1." You know what I'm saying? So he never really promoted it to sell it, if that makes any sense. It was just, yes, he made money off of it, and he admitted that he made money off of it. He didn't hide that fact. But he also said that he didn't make a dime off of all the work they did with Share International, all the lecturing that he did, all the television interviews that he did. And even the book sales, he never made a dime off of that. So, and he did put a lot of time and effort into it. And he actually, in a lot of ways, was detrimental to his art career because he lost a lot of friends and allies in the art scene in London because of what his statements about Maitreya and so forth. They didn't like that and they turned away from it. So it wasn't financially beneficial for him to do what he did. He actually lost a lot, really, to be honest with you. I mean, he gained a lot too, but financially and artistically wise, he lost a lot in terms of the amount of time and energy that he could put into painting and creating new paintings, to even his contacts and his art gallery contacts turn their back on him based on what he, was saying. So that's not entirely true what you're saying. So hopefully that helps in that regard. Now, in terms of nothing panning out, okay, now I can see where you're coming from again, okay, so I'm not trying to sound argumentative. Please don't take it like that, Herbert. But there were a lot of things that panned out that he said. and they were published before they happened. One was the ending of the Cold War, which seems like a no-brainer today, but when it was when the announcement was made and published in Share International, it was quite extraordinary. Same thing with the release of Nelson Mandela, quite extraordinary. The stock market crash starting in Japan as it did in the 80s was quite extraordinary, which panned out. With the other thing was George Bush Sr., he said, Maitreya made the announcement, it was published in Share International, that he would lose the next election in 1992, which he did. And he made that announcement when Bush Sr.'s approval rating was at a 93% approval rating, unheard of by U.S. president standards, and lost the election, and then a Democrat would be the president, and so forth. So there were things that did pan out. And the other one was, most recently, was that there would be a star-like luminary that would fill the skies and create a buzz about Maitreya's first television interview. And it culminated with the Norwegian spiral, So there were a lot of things that panned out, the miracles and so forth. And, I don't talk about the miracles a lot. I should talk about them more, right? But if you go to the Share International site, you can see images of these miracles that started around the time that Benjamin Creme made the announcement that the world would start to get flooded with these miracles. So there have been a lot of things that have panned out. Yes, and I'm somebody that will tell you, it's taken a long time from my perspective, for a lot of these changes to happen. But the more I study this, the more I look at it, the more I see it from this perspective, okay? And might I suggest us look at it from the humanity's perspective. Have we changed at all? And the question is, maybe, from the master's point of view, they say yes, but has it been enough? No. I live in the United States, and what we're dealing with in this country politically, the divide politically is just, it's painful to the extreme. But that is holding, just the United States probably, and it's happening all around the world, I think is part of the reason why a lot of these changes haven't taken place in the time frame that we were thinking that they would take place. So I'm not making any cosmic excuses. I'm just saying that it really boils down to, has humanity done anything? Have we even started to try, even just on a basic level, the principle of sharing to see if it would bring about peace? No, hasn't happened yet. So until that happens, I can kind of see why it's taken longer than we might think. The other thing too is, in terms of the interview with Maitreya, I can also understand why people are impatient or they don't think there's any truth to it because they haven't recognized him. I know of somebody, and I know it sounds kind of somebody who knows of somebody, but I know somebody who was in this group who met somebody at a lecture that they were putting on that said that they had recognized Maitreya on TV. He didn't look like the photo at all. He wasn't even talking about sharing in that way. He was talking about politics. That's what she said. But I do think this. Maitreya is very adept at speaking in a way that's very simple, okay, and not causing a lot of attention to himself. And so if he is on TV, which I know he is on TV, but let's just put it as if he's speaking in a way that is not drawing attention to him as Maitreya. He doesn't look like him. He might be talking about other things, but yet being who he is, right, and opening up the hearts of humanity in a way. But it's not. His head hasn't really gone above the horizon as of yet. So it's very hard to recognize him as that. But I do think, Herbert and others who are listening to this, that more than likely, when you do recognize him on TV, he will be a familiar face that you've already seen and recognized before. That's my thinking. I could be wrong, you know what I'm saying? But that's my thinking of it. And Maitreya said a long time ago, when you run after him, you've already lost him. So those people who were looking for the Raj Patel interview, right, and they thought for sure that was him, they had already lost Maitreya at that point because now they're digging in the wrong spot. They're running after him. when it should be about his priorities. Now, to swing it back to the priorities in some of his teachings, okay, I'm going to kind of tie it into people's personal experiences with Maitreya. I wrote in several times my own personal experiences to Ben, okay? He didn't always say yes. And the ones that he said was not Maitreya, I was personally convinced that it was, okay? So there were a couple other times that I was just talking about something randomly and he said that was Maitreya and I wasn't thinking it was Maitreya. And so when I started thinking back on it, I was like, oh, that makes sense. But he did not always say yes. I know that for a fact personally. And I also heard him when people at the end of his lectures that we put on here in Atlanta, people asked him, oh, was this that? And he said, no, that wasn't Maitreya. So he didn't always say yes. Okay. And one of the most notable ones was there was a gentleman that you can see videos of him that he was claiming contact with Benjamin Creme's master and being able to be overshadowed by Maitreya, but his name was Wayne Peterson. And there were all these wonderful experiences, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, that he had with the masters that were published in Share International. And I didn't notice it until Benjamin Creme said something about it. It was kind of a lesson to the group. But I remember talking to my girlfriend at the time. I was like, these don't sound like experiences with the masters. They're just weird. I mean, it was just weird kind of things. And she was like, well, they're published in Share International. They must be, that kind of thing. Well, anyway, there was a huge stink that happened. Wayne kind of left the group and people were, he wanted to kind of start his own group and that kind of thing. And Benjamin Creme said, I never confirmed that they were Maitreya or the masters. And he went back and read it, and not one of them said that Benjamin Creme's master confirmed they were masters, but they were published in Share International. And it was kind of an eye-opener for people. But I remember saying to my girlfriend at the time, was like, these are not, they don't sound anything like the experiences that I had personally had with Maitreya. Now, that being said too, okay, I have had a lot of experiences with Maitreya that I know without a doubt that Maitreya is who he is. Some of them happened before I knew this information. Some of them happened after. Some of them were quite ordinary. Some of them were quite extraordinary. Okay, so one that I think was the most extraordinary, because it happened before I knew anything about Maitreya, actually. And like I said, I'm just telling you this. You can believe it or not. You don't know me, and really, it's better that way because it's more honest for yourself. You can see if there's any truth to it, and you don't take my word for it just because I'm somebody of note. You know what I mean? But I'm a musician, and I was a professional musician starting out when I was young. I don't play music as much anymore, but I was touring with a band over in Japan. And about halfway through the tour that I was playing, when I was playing with this band, a woman asked me for my autograph. And I signed it with a peace sign, a heart, and a happy face. And I signed my name really messy. And then I started to sign my name like that at various times during the tour. Peace, heart, happy face, and Gary, really messy. Well, anyway, when I got back to Atlanta, I had only told my mother this, who lives in South Carolina, which is about 3.5 hours away from where I live. So I never told anybody in Atlanta that I signed my name like that. And I was driving in a part of town that I had been probably 10,000 times since then. But up until that point, Herbert, I had really rarely went into this side of town because I was still kind of new to Atlanta. Anyway, I stopped off at a payphone to call someone, and as I was putting the quarter into the phone, now keep in mind this is before I knew anything about this information, so I didn't put it there in my own mind. I was not looking for a miracle. I didn't even know miracles existed at this time. So anyway, I was about to put the quarter in the phone, and written on the payphone in black magic marker, along with all this other graffiti that was all over the phone, it said, "To Gary." There was a heart sign, a peace sign, and a happy face. It said, "Still alive and well." There was a cross, and it was signed the Christ. And at the time, I didn't recognize it. I was like, oh, somebody signs their name just like I did in Japan. And I kind of went off with my day. And probably very similar to people's reactions to Maitreya on TV. They have no idea that Maitreya is who he is speaking to them on TV. It's just some person on TV, and they don't think anything of it. Right, but they will eventually. They'll go back. Oh my God, that was the guy I saw on the such and such a show, back in the day, and he was talking about this. I never even picked up on it. That's how the people's reactions, I think, are going to be when they finally recognize Maitreya on TV or after the Day of Declaration or something like that. But totally missed it. And it wasn't until I started reading in the Share International magazine about these people's experiences that I actually thought to even ask Benjamin Creme about it. And I didn't really talk to people about it before then. It was just a weird happening that happened in my life at that time. Now it has a lot more significance for me. But the other thing was, I had a couple other ones, but the other one that happened, February 2020, so after Benjamin Creme died, I was working on the side of my house in a ladder, and I was up about 7.5, 8 feet in the air, and the ladder tipped over, and I was falling right to the driveway. Excuse me. And headed toward extreme injury or death. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. When you fall head first onto concrete from that high, it isn't going to be good, right? So I was falling that fast. And the only thing I could get out after I stopped cussing was Maitreya. I yelled out Maitreya. And as soon as I yelled out his name, I stopped in midair and was gently laid down onto the concrete with the same kind of gingerly care that a first-time mother would do with her child in the crib. That's exactly how slow I hit the ground. And I laid there for a few seconds not realizing what had happened. It was so surreal that I looked at myself. I had no bumps, bruises. There was no marks even on my clothes. And I had just fallen that far onto the ground, right? Now, I didn't just go back up and try it again, you know what I'm saying? But because I would have fallen to my death at that point, or severe injury or paralysis or whatever. But that happened. So, and then the other one was, I was cleaning a building, and I was kind of stressed because it was my third job of the day, because I had 3 jobs at the time. And I was at a very low point, my stressful time in my life. It was in December of that year, and I asked Maitreya for some help. That's all I asked, was help with the trash on one side of the building. I was very specific with it, but I was just driving one day. I was spouting off to myself, Maitreya, I just need some help with that trash. And that's all I said to him. Forgot all about it, didn't think anything more about it. A month or so later, the woman who saw Maitreya, who knows nothing about Maitreya, at the building that I cleaned, told me not to lock the door going into her side of the building. Now, I skipped a step. A week or two later, I noticed that there was no trash in just this one side of the building that was always known for dumping a lot of trash and causing a lot of time delays. And I had to keep making multiple trips up to the very top of the building and going down and back and back to the dumpster, and it was taking me an extra 15-20 minutes to dump the trash. Anyway, so I had asked Maitreya for help. I'm so sorry, I kind of skipped. And this 1 week, for just 1 week, it was just 5 days, there was no trash in this building. That's what it was. And this side of the building. The other parts of the building had trash. Bathroom still needed to be cleaned. I still needed to vacuum, but this one part didn't. The trash, the same area that I was asking Maitreya for help, didn't have any trash that week. And it made all the difference. I felt so much better. And that was the only time it ever happened. And not long after that, the woman who was in charge of that portion of the building that had all the trash, Herbert, told me not to lock the door because she didn't have her key. And I said, no problem. And it was a secure building, and I forgot to mention that too. But anyway, so she was going to the bathroom. She said, don't lock the door. I don't have a key to get back in. I said, sure, no problem. And then she looks at me and she goes, and make sure you tell your associate to not lock the door. I'm like, what associate? I work by myself. Carol, you know who I'm talking about. And she goes, no, the guy that helped you out a few months ago. He came in, he was here she told me, for a few days or whatever like this, got the trash and left. That was Maitreya, right? So he didn't look like Maitreya in Nairobi, Kenya, but she said he looked like a tall black man, was very quiet, but she was like, thought she had seen a ghost, right? And then to kind of top off that story, when I started doing these videos, Herbert, back in February of I think I started in 2019, I think it's 19 when I started. So about 2 years, almost going on 3 years now. I wanted to tell this story, could not remember this woman's name to save my life. And I looked at the hand of Maitreya and I said, Maitreya, can you help me remember this woman's name so I could tell this story? The next day of my job, I had not seen this woman in years. The next day, the very next day, she walks into where I work. And I was like, "What is your name?" And she goes, "Carol." And I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." She had no idea why I was so excited to see her. So I can't prove things to you about this, but I can tell you from my own personal testimony, there is truth to what Benjamin Creme was saying. And you don't have to believe me. You know, you don't even have to go around telling people about it, Herbert. You know what I mean? But I have complete faith in what Benjamin Creme said is true, based on my own personal experiences, but also based on me just studying this information and looking at it and studying it again, learning from it, growing from it, even learning and growing from some of the things that Maitreya said to me in my own life that have changed my life, that an ordinary person, yes, they could have said that and had the same kind of impact, but I've never had that kind of impact with some of these other people. You know, like Maitreya even telling me one time, I never judge anyone on whether they're good or bad. I only notice the good things that they do. And I started applying it to people in my life, and it's changed my way of looking at people. I start to love people more than I did, way more than I did that, because I was pretty critical of people, you know, when he said that to me. So, you know, this is not my way of being defensive with you, and hopefully, and I'm sure you didn't take it like this because I'm not, but it's my way of trying to explain to you that there is truth to this information. You know, if you look for it, if you search for it, you will see that there might be some truth to it, but or not. You know, I mean, and it's okay to not believe this. You're not alone, right? But that's why I talk about this information. You know, because people like yourself have heard about it, maybe still believe it, maybe don't. You know, that kind of stuff. People might have had experiences with Maitreya and not realized it. It might trigger a memory, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. So hopefully that helps. So I think I addressed every point except for the Putin one. I don't know anything about Maitreya appearing in Putin, but anyway, that doesn't matter. But anyway, I think I addressed everything. So, but I really appreciate your comment, Herbert, because it definitely helped us to kind of look at this and discuss this further. I know I went kind of long, but anyway, you take care, Herbert, and everybody, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon.
Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.